First of all, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of 2 children. I'm a wife. And I also work. I mean, these are different lives. I started off as being a teacher of primary school. That was before I went to university. And then as a student, I also worked in many odd jobs, being an interpreter. And I think that was one of the hardest jobs, I think, being an interpreter à Renault Véhicule Industriel. So when I came back after my studies, where I studied biochemistry, I did up to my master's level, and I came back and I wanted to work in a research institution in Mauritius. I am from Mauritius, and unfortunately I did not find a job in a research institution, so I started teaching. I started teaching biology at secondary level. And that was also not an easy task. I think this is why I always admire teachers, because teaching is not an easy job at all. From there on, I went on to the university to be a teacher trainer. I was a teacher trainer for many years, where I taught about science education and of course biochemistry, biology, etc. And during that time, I did my PhD in education, so I totally transited from being a science person to being an education person. So I have those backgrounds of being both education and science, I think, which is a very important post, I think, which is very important, especially for the post of Commissioner of Education, Science and Technology. And I was also offered a job as a senior policy officer in the education division at the African Union Commission, which I did for 5 years before joining as the head of the African Union International Center for Girls and Women's Education, where I have been working here for the past 5 years. So what I really want to say is that I think that as a woman, we can be a mother, we can be a professional, we can be a wife, but we have to believe in ourselves, and I want to give this message to all the girls and all the women: believe in yourselves and you will be able to reach where you want to go towards your dreams. I am very honored to be among the 100 most influential women of African women in 2020. And I think the reason relates to the fact that girls' education is something which is very important to the continent. I presently head the African Union International Center for Girls and Women's Education, which is a specialized institution of the African Union. And we only became operational at the end of 2014, and we have been working now 6 years on this issue, such an important issue of girls and women's education, and making a niche for ourselves in the continent. We are now well known in the whole continent and also outside of the continent on being the reference point for girls and women's education in the continent. So having set up this institution from scratch, I think really has been my biggest strength. But also, I think having set up a platform of partners with development partners such as UNESCO, UNICEF, with other partners from countries such as Norway, civil society, FAWE, Save the Children, has also enabled us to do things differently. We have not worked in the traditional route. We have tried to coordinate our efforts together, try to have a collaborative effort so that girls and women's education becomes more of a holistic approach. But I think also one of the other reasons why I have been nominated as one of the most influential women is that we have done a lot of capacity building workshops with our young women and men, of course, in the continent. We do this regularly every year, and today we have over 200 of our alumni who are today our champions, our ambassadors of girls and women's education. And they now are the ones to go in the community and talk about the importance of not only going to school, that is accessing education, but completing their schooling. So I think these are the key reasons. But I think another issue is that a lot of the young women who have now become friends, many of them whom I know, see me also as a role model, see me as being a mentor, but also seeing a woman being able to lead an institution of the African Union. So I think having this role model, becoming a mentor to our young African women, I think is really something that has made me be on this list. Where the issue of girls' education is not that predominant, is not that talked about, we all go to school. It was only when I joined the AU in 2007 when one of my first projects was to look at girls' education that I became aware of the issues that hampered or hindered girls from accessing education. And this was really a shock to me, coming from a different country where we didn't really talk about this issues of child marriage, of early pregnancy, of FGM. So when I first heard about this, it came as a shock. So I slowly started talking, reading, wanting to learn more. And this is what has been happening for the past 12 years until I got the job at the AUCFA, where I was really able to do more about ensuring that girls access and complete their schooling. My vision is aligned with that of Agenda 2063. Our vision of Agenda 2063 is the Africa we want, which is a peaceful and prosperous Africa driven by its own citizens. If we want an Africa to be driven by its own citizens, we have to have well-educated people. And for this, we need a quality education. We need to have learners who have been to school, who have completed their schooling, and we leave no learners behind, especially our girls. And for this, if we want to have an innovation-led society, it needs to be catalyzed by social transformation, innovation, and competitiveness. And for this, we need several things. We need, if we're talking about a quality education today, we need to have quality teachers. We need to have teachers who have first of all, the proper qualifications, but also who have been properly trained. We know that a lot of our teachers today on our continent do not necessarily have access to training outside of their schooling. They have had no proper training in teacher education. So it is very important that as teachers, they have a proper training. For example, as we are now in a world of COVID, many of our countries are using technology, and many of our teachers have had no training in teaching using technology. So these needs to be part of the training process. We also need to look at the curriculum. How is our curriculum going to be adapted to this new 21st century, but also to the new needs of the society? We know that many of our teaching and learning materials today are not contextualized. We are still using some of the books from the colonial times, and there is a lot of bias. There is a lot of gender bias in our books. So our curriculum, our teaching and learning resources need to be more contextualized, more useful, more friendly, more gender friendly, more user friendly, and most importantly, learner-centered. That is, the approach is on the learner and not on the teacher. I would now like to go to higher education. We know that in the next 15 years, 40% of the existing jobs will no longer be here. So our higher education institutions have to respond to this. What type of courses do we need to give our young learners, our young men and women, so that they can respond to the needs of tomorrow? We know that soft skills are going to be the asset tomorrow. We want young people who can, first of all, have reflective thinking, who can have problem-solving skills, who can take decisions, who can take critical thinking. So we are now at a time where we have to rethink. So these are going to be my priorities when I become commissioner in 2021. We are living in unprecedented times. COVID has unfortunately disrupted education. Even though many of our countries have tried to ensure continued learning through distance education, that is through radio and television, and sometimes online learning, we know that many of our learners have not had the opportunity to have access to this continued learning. So it is also a time, I think we should also see this COVID times as a time of opportunity. We should not only see it as being something bad. It is a time when we can rethink as a society, what does education mean? What type of citizen do we want? I think it is a time when we can have a big debate about the vision of education. What type of learner? So it is important now to concentrate a lot more on the learner, on the type of learner, on the type of citizen. Let us think of the citizen that we want in this new world normal that we are talking about. It is also time when we're talking a lot of social distancing. At the time that we're talking now, some schools have not opened. Some countries are still facing a lot of issues about social distancing. So we are going more and more towards blended learning. As we are talking more about blended learning, that means we will have both face-to-face learning, but also distance learning. That means we are going to use more technology in our teaching and learning process. This means, first of all, our curriculum cannot be the same. We cannot teach in the same way. We cannot learn in the same way. That means our teachers have to go along with this. The curriculum has to adapt. The technology providers have also to follow suit. It is not the technology which will drive the education process, but the education process will help the technology to ensure that learning and teaching happens optimally. As we are talking about social distancing, that means we need to have larger classes, more classrooms, because we know that in many of our classrooms there are about 50 children. So in the times of COVID, we should now have smaller classrooms, which means a bigger expenditure for governments. So it is a time where, as communities, as youth, as policymakers, we need to go for higher funding, higher financing for education. We are at a time where a lot of our budgets are being unfortunately diverted, at this time, to health issues or to peace and security. We need to ensure at this very, very opportune time that funding is given to education. We should not forget science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We should also rethink about the funding of research in STEM. What type of research are we going to fund and how? We need to think about the publishing models of scientific research. Of course, not everybody can finish or who wants to finish their schooling. And of course, life doesn't end here if you don't finish school. There are other opportunities, and one of the opportunities is technical vocation education and training, which unfortunately we do not give enough attention to. And I think it is very important that it is given attention to. It has to be part of mainstream. TVET is part of mainstream, technical vocation education and training. And the youth who do not want to go into mainstream education, for example, doing languages or science, they can go into TVET. And TVET is something which has such a lot of opportunities today. Because, as I said, we do not know what types of jobs we will be looking for in the next 15 years. So let them go into training of technical vocation education and training. But most importantly, we want our youth today. We don't need to give them jobs. They have to create their own jobs. And this is what I want to say to the youth. Go and have a training and think of the jobs that you can create, not only for yourselves, but for other youth as well. So, going to school is not an end in itself. There are many streams in education. Formal education, non-formal education, TVET. There are many streams.